Hi, it's Monday, August 18th, and we're tracking Hurricane Erin in the western Atlantic today. This is the system here sitting northeast of the Turks and Caicos Islands. This system is avoiding the islands from a direct hit from the eye wall of the storm, but we are getting raked with some of the outer bands, bringing tropical storm force winds and heavy rainfall to these islands, and this will continue over the next day or so as the system gradually lifts north into the western Atlantic. But we're certainly feeling good that the core of the storm just went north of you all. It did not deviate far enough south to where we get a direct hit, but we certainly are still getting some impacts from the storm. Now, right now, the system has had some structural changes since my last video on Saturday. It has expanded its wind field as I talked about it would, as it underwent an eye-wall replacement cycle after its initial Category 5 peak, and now the system's winds have come down to around 140 miles per hour, making this a mid-grade Category 4 hurricane. Still extremely powerful, but the more dangerous part now is that we're a much more broad system than we were a couple of days ago. And this expansion is forecast to continue as we go in time due to structural changes as the system lifts north, and that's going to lead to a further expansion of the wind field that will bring impacts in all likelihood to the eastern US, specifically eastern North Carolina and even Bermuda, even though we're forecast to take a pretty solid track for the eye between those two landmasses. This is the recon data from earlier this morning showing you the expansion of that wind field. You can see anything in the purple barbs here is hurricane force winds at the flight level of the plane. Now that's going to be higher than it is at the surface, but anywhere in these purple barbs are capable of bringing hurricane force gusts at the surface, though fortunately it does look like the expanse of the hurricane force winds is a little bit less on the southwestern side, hopefully keeping down the highest wind gust values that we see in the Turks and Caicos Islands, but we're still certainly getting tropical storm force winds across these islands. Now, going forward, like I mentioned, the system is going to continue to expand. You can see where the system is now on this HAPS model forecast is showing you the wind field with the system near the surface. And you can see the green area is tropical storm force winds, purple is hurricane force winds. And we've expanded some since a couple of days ago. You can see that wind field expand on the model analysis. But as we go in time, this wind field continues to expand. And you can see that by the time we get to Thursday morning and Thursday afternoon, this is a very large hurricane now just east of the coast of North Carolina. You can see these green colors are raking the coast of North Carolina, and we do have a tropical storm watch in effect because of this potential for tropical storm force winds to impact the coast here. Now, for Bermuda, we have seen the track continue to deviate a little bit west of what we were talking about a couple of days ago. And this does do good initially because we are not expecting as, let's say, a long period, long duration of tropical storm force winds, though there is still, I'd say, significant potential of tropical storm force winds, at least tropical storm force gusts across the island, as when the system begins to recurve into the North Atlantic, it's not going to be a gradual curve and get close to the northeast US like some storms sometimes do take. The system is going to make a rather hard right as it turns northeast. And so that will mean that the system, while it is still gaining latitude by this point, is going to get a little close to Bermuda. You can see the island is about here, and the tropical storm force wind field is getting rather close to that island. And we could see some tropical storm force winds from the system as it recurs, though the good news is, compared to the forecast a couple of days ago, it looks like the duration of those winds may be less than originally thought, thanks to that westward shift of what we saw track-wise. And beyond that point, the wind field will continue to expand as we transition into more of a non-tropical cyclone. You can see the system tracking south of southeast Canada. This seems to be a pretty locked-in track, though, for the coast of Nova Scotia and Newfoundland. It's likely going to be a windy end to the week and start to the weekend here as the non-tropical system now by this time Erin by this point tracks towards the south, and hopefully we can get some beneficial rains from this in Newfoundland to help with some of the wildfire issues that we've had in this part of the world. Hopefully we can kind of get that Goldilocks scenario like I talked about a couple of days ago, where we get heavy rainfall that helps with the wildfire risk, and you avoid the core of the wind. And so far, it looks like we may be on track for that. So hopefully things go to forecast, at least what it is right now. This is the 5-day forecast for the National Hurricane Center. You can see where the system is right now in the large wind field that we have with it, with tropical storm watches and warnings for the southeast Bahamas and Turks and Caicos, and remaining a major hurricane out to Thursday morning local time. And that's going to be primarily because of the system's expansion and size. The environment seems pretty favorable for the foreseeable future, at least until it gets into the North Atlantic. But the system, as it grows in size, is going to be getting, in a way, too big for its own good. As it gets further north, the waters, they are still plenty warm. I can show you this if we look at the HAPS model sea surface temperature plot. You can see up here they're 29, 30 degrees Celsius in spots. Very warm, very suitable for a major hurricane. But as the wind field grows, you can see that we have very strong winds in a good area, a good chunk in advance of where the eye is by that point. And that wind is going to be able to churn up water, colder water, pretty fast in advance of the eye, because the waters in this part of the Atlantic are not nearly as deep as they are further south. And that's going to cause the waters, by the time the eye moves over that part of the Atlantic, to be cooler than you would normally want for a major hurricane. And so that's going to lead to a gradual decrease in the maximum winds that we have in the center of the storm. It also has to do with the system being larger, taking up a greater surface area as well. But those maximum winds are not going to be all too important to talk about, because at the end of the day, this is going to be a very large hurricane by the time it gets to this part of the forecast. And we're also going to be dealing with a lot of ocean issues, especially in North Carolina. We have also had, alongside the tropical storm watches put in effect, we've also had storm surge watches in effect, because we have the potential for very high waves coming up against the Outer Banks coast, and the onshore flow on the backside of the hurricane pushing that water ashore. And we could see some significant storm surge that could be life-threatening. And we do have some mandatory evacuations that were issued along some islands in the Outer Banks of North Carolina. If you're in those evacuation orders, heed them, as storm surge, even if it's not a massive surge that we're expecting here, it still is extremely dangerous to your life. And a storm surge watch means that it's possible that there is storm surge that is life-threatening. Here's the wave forecast from the GFS, just to show you how high the waves may be as they come up against the coast. You can see this is by Thursday afternoon, and anything in the purple there is 21 feet or higher, and that's very high waves. And notice how they're expanding very far from the eye of the hurricane. Here's Bermuda, and here's Cape Hatteras, pretty much having the same wave height, even though the eye of the hurricane is about an equal distance from both of those. And I think the forecast office in eastern North Carolina, the weather forecast office, does forecast 15 to 20-foot waves coming along the coast of the Outer Banks. And alongside that onshore flow, it's going to make it very easy for that water to come ashore and flood areas along that coast. And this is not just going to be limited to North Carolina. I think the worst impacts of storm surge are going to be across North Carolina, but really across the entire U.S. seaboard. We could be seeing some coastal flooding impacts from Florida all the way up to the Northeast. As you can see, this continues as the system continues towards the Northeast and recurves. All these strong waves continue through the latter half of the week and into the weekend, only getting better by the latter half of the weekend and into early next week. This is a storm surge forecast from the National Hurricane Center. You can see anything in blue is generally 1 to 3 feet of storm surge in the inland areas, in the rivers in eastern North Carolina, 1 to 2 feet. But anything in the yellow there is 2 to 4 feet above normal dry ground. And that's why we have some of the evacuation orders in effect for some barrier islands in North Carolina. That is life-threatening flash flooding, or storm surge flooding, rather. And you definitely don't want to be in the way of some of that storm surge flooding. And for the rest of the coast, like I mentioned a couple of days ago, the rip current risk is going to be rather high across the entire eastern seaboard, and we really have a high risk across the entire eastern coast. So if you are heading to the beach in an area that's not going to be directly impacted by tropical storm force winds and the storm surge, just be aware that the beach conditions are going to be rough, even if the storm is very far away. So stay tuned to your local weather office and lifeguards for information on where you can swim and be safest, because you definitely don't want to be swimming in high rip current risk that is life threatening and something you don't want to get caught into. That's all that I've got for Hurricane Erin. We are going to talk about another system in the eastern tropical Atlantic. We're watching another tropical wave. It's this broad area of low pressure embedded within it here in the eastern tropical Atlantic. And this system is forecast to track west over the next few days and near the Leeward Islands and Lesser Antilles by the latter half of the week and into the weekend. And models are now firing up on this, showing potential for development as we get into this part of the forecast. You can see the GFS shows a fairly favorable upper level pattern for the system. There may be some easterly shear to start off. We do have some stronger easterly flow in the upper levels of the atmosphere. And if I take a sounding from the GFS to show you the shear profile, you can see we have weaker winds at the surface and stronger winds at the upper levels of the atmosphere. And this is vertical speed shear by definition, and you can see it's about 20 knots on this model forecast. And that may limit some development in the short term for how quick we see the system develop. Another thing is that we do just have a very broad area of low pressure with this. So naturally, development with this wave is going to be pretty gradual. It's not going to be like Erin and developing fairly quickly in the tropical Atlantic. But as we go in time, you'll see the GFS does form this. This is by Friday morning local time, and we have a tropical storm on the model now approaching the Leeward Islands. The European is similar to this. It's not a tropical system, or tropical cyclone rather, by that point, but it is a closed area of low pressure, it looks like, on this model, which could be forming into a tropical depression by this point on the model. And this is pretty good agreement from not only the GFS and European, but also other global models. And we're not expecting at this point any strong storm out of this. If it is just forming by the time it gets to the northern Leeward Islands, it wouldn't in all likelihood be a very strong system. Alongside that, it's very broad, so a broader system is going to take more time to develop and intensify after formation. But of course, I know a lot of you are going to be asking, okay, what's the forecast after this point? Is there reason to watch this further west in the Bahamas, in the Greater Antilles, in the US, in Bermuda? And it's certainly something to watch for now because we are in peak season, getting towards peak season. So we need to watch these waves more and more as they track west. But there's a lot of uncertainty, as you would expect at this range, in the forecast track. The first issue is Hurricane Erin as it's lifting out by this point. By this time, the wave is now getting towards the northern Leeward Islands, and we have two camps right now. Even though the GFS and the European are in agreement of the system trying to form by that point, they differ heavily on the evolution of Erin and the pattern further north of this wave. The scenarios are that if Erin tracks northeast quicker, that means that this ridge across the subtropical Atlantic would be able to build in faster, and that would, in effect, cause the system to track further west, potentially impacting land areas further towards the east, or further towards the west, rather. But if Erin is a little bit slower on its progression east, that may keep this weakness in the ridge still here, and that may allow a window for the system just to sneak north and out to sea. The only concern there would be potential impacts to Bermuda down the line. And alongside that, there's also other issues beyond that point. After Erin, there's going to be some kind of trough in the eastern United States. It's a fairly agreed upon idea by most models that some kind of trough is going to be here. But the strength and position of this trough is differing between models. The GFS seems to be a little bit stronger and further east with this. That could be a scenario where we get the system just barely able to recurve east of the United States because we have this ridge here and this trough here, which could turn the system out to sea. But other models, like the European, are a little bit weaker with it and further west. And that could be a scenario where this ridge may be able to extend further west across the Atlantic, and whatever we have by this point may be forced further west, and it could impact areas further west. And strength, of course, we don't know of because there's also a lot of obstacles here. A difficulty with the system tracking the way this wave seems to be tracking is we don't know how far north or south it's going to be by the time we get to the Leeward Islands. And that's especially important when it's going through some of these Greater Antilles Islands, especially Hispaniola, because the mountainous terrain in Hispaniola can act to destroy virtually a tropical system entirely and disrupt it for several days after it interacts with the landmass. And that could mean that we get a system that really does not do much. Flip side, it could avoid the island, not deal with the high terrain, and maybe we see some form of intensification. So there's a lot of uncertainty with this next wave. Now, the good news is we have time to watch this. This is 5 to 7 days out when we would be seeing it impact any land areas here further west. As of right now, the National Hurricane Center gives us a 60% chance of development. Seems like a fair odd to me, as most models show a favorable environment, and models are starting to catch on to the idea of the system forming by the end of the week and into the weekend. And I'll have more videos on this as we do go in time, as it continues tracking west towards these islands. But as of right now, nothing imminent to watch and nothing like an imminent threat of a strong hurricane. We're just looking at a tropical wave that might form in the next 7 days. That's all that I've got for today on both of these systems. I'll have more updates on Erin and the tropical wave and the tropical Atlantic over the next few days, but stay safe in the eastern US, Turks and Caicos, and Bermuda as Erin impacts you in the next coming days. That's all for now. Thanks for watching.